like the biggest failure in my life would be like failing my kids. Like, so it just didn't seem to matter. Like as hard as that was to shut the doors, and like we decided just to like kind of let that happen, I felt even more like questions in my life. I'm like, am I really focused on what matters? How can I create more balance in my life and not get fully sucked into things that are like consuming my whole life?
Welcome to the real F word. Lindsey, welcome. So excited to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.
And I'm excited to unpack some of your personal experiences, both as a marketing leader, as a consultant, and as an entrepreneur, and trying to build something. And then finally, you're putting together a really interesting event. So we're going to talk about all those things in the next 45 minutes.
Yes.
So
sounds good.
Tell me a little bit about Ivy League growth and how you, I think the early part of your consulting experience, you engaged with 3 different companies to help them scale, and they all ran into some issues. And I've, as we've talked about this, there's some patterns and some learning there that I'd love to share. Yeah.
So that's actually kind of how we began our consulting business. Was my husband and I. So we started working on a few different startups together, but it was more full time because at the time, like 8-9 years ago, like fractional CROs, CMOs, and those type of things weren't as well known. Like there weren't as many companies that were doing that. So him and I both came on. Like the first company we started with was a student housing software. So we were, and that was like my first time working with like a SaaS company. Before that, I was working in telecom. So it was like, slinging fiber and all those fun things. But we were like in it, and I was over a lot of the partnership stuff, and he was in the sales too. So we were just like out knocking doors of like different university, their student housing buildings. And we were just like all over Provo, because obviously there's a lot there. Sure. And we got a lot of sales like lined up for them. And it was a really cool software. It was unique in what they were doing, where you could go in and you can book like a room with your other, like if you have another roommate. So usually it's like you're booking the whole space, but it was like you could book the bed. So that was kind of unique at the time. And it was because like front facing, like the MVP and everything looked amazing. It was like super polished, looked great. It was really easy to get people on board. And we did get quite, like we had a huge pipeline.
You built the marketing strategy and the sales strategy.
Yeah, sales. We were crushing the sales, but then it came time to onboard. And I still have a little PTSD from some of that because it was basically it was like a clickable wireframe at the time. So I remember sitting inside of like King Henry. Is it like King Henry? Is that the student house? There's like one of the
somewhere
old
down
in Provo.
In Provo,
watching people line up to like sign up for it or like just to onboard, and every 2 seconds is breaking. I was just sitting there like shaking, like on the phone with the dev team. It was completely falling apart.
Because you sold it before it had really been built.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is not a bad strategy for an entrepreneur.
It's not.
Unless sales
you're trying to do that.
outstrips your ability to build the product.
So I just sat there and I was just watching like everything fall apart in front of me. And then I had to see it. Like, it's not only like, it's one thing to sell something, but it's another thing to physically be there and watch it completely like not work. And there's nothing you can do about it. And that was like really a lot for me. But what had to happen in this case is they brought in like a dev team, and they're like, okay, now you're selling you're selling dev services, because they had to go and build it, but they also had to bring in revenue. So our roles switched from selling the student housing software to selling dev services.
Outsourced dev development.
And
services.
that happened
That's interesting.
back to back to back. It's crazy. Like same exact situation.
And what was your role in the company then? Were you a consultant? Were you an owner?
I was a part of, we were like the first, like
basically the first employees.
The salespeople. Yeah. And so that happened again with another company.
Same story?
Same exact thing.
You sold it. You got some early traction. People were buying what you were selling, but then when they turned it on, it didn't.
It did not. Yeah, the integration.
Like how bad was the
last one? One of them was rough because it was like it affected people's business like in a big way because of what it was. I won't go into details on that one, but it happened so like it's crazy. After 3 times of that happening, I'm like, okay, like this is a pattern.
3 times in a row.
3 times in a row, same exact problem. They had to bring it an in-house dev team. We were then now selling dev services to like bring in revenue, but it was the same exact problem. Like,
and in each case, they were trying to drive revenue from both the product they had built as well as
which was way too early. It wasn't working. They needed. Well, in a lot of ways, it was just how it was built. It needed to be built with an enterprise level, like software development team.
Why do you think that was? Was it a function of the entrepreneurs and their kind of technical capabilities? Why do you think? Because that's really unusual for you to have the same experience 3 times in a row. It sounds like you crushed the sales and marketing piece. Which,
well, they had a good product. I was excited about it. I was like super.
Or the product vision.
The vision of to specify, like the product wasn't working, but the vision of like the problem it solved was really good. But in the same way, in those cases, what I found was interesting in the pattern of it is they all raised money. So I feel like when it's not your money coming out of your pocket and you can like just dump it into different things, like you're not as thoughtful.
Interesting.
In how it's built.
They raised money from angel investors?
Angel investors.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was enough to like, throw a couple $100,000 at like the development and put into your team. But that was the case in like all 3 of them. They had done that early raise based on like their pitch.
Right. An amazing story, a vision, a problem to be solved in the market. And then ta-da, doesn't work.
Yeah. It's just crazy. Yeah. And I would imagine I've heard it happens a lot. Right.
So it's interesting to break down, maybe the pattern is, hey, like you oversold. Right? That you sold something that really wasn't ready for prime time. Maybe because they had access to outside money, they were a little bit more aggressive at selling the product early, right? To show some traction to those investors so they could raise more money. It also could be a question of whether or not early stage startups should be product-led growth or marketing-led growth.
Yeah.
You've had many experiences since then with clients in your own startups. Where in your experience have you seen the most success from early stage technology startups? Product-led growth or marketing and sales-led growth?
That's a good question. I think it depends on what you're selling. Like in like a lot of places, like in the e-com space, it's like marketing, right? Like you could sell, if you have like the right marketing engine, you can sell anything. But when it comes to like there just has to be the functionality, like it has to work, which just sounds crazy and like sounds like a really dumb thing to say because it's like, well, duh, like why would you sell something that doesn't work? You'd be very surprised, like how many people are out there like pre-selling a product that's not there. And I feel like you don't want to bring a sales team on too soon. Okay. If you're the founder, you should be ready and prepared to make those first sales until it works.
Because the founder is closer maybe to the product development and the functionality and the capabilities than a salesperson, especially a hired gun, right?
Well, especially if they're not being truthful about like where the product is and they're just like, just go sell it.
Yeah, sales will solve our problems.
They'll just solve all the problems. We'll fix it as soon as they sell it and we can just make it work.
But you're threading a needle as an entrepreneur because like revenue does solve a lot of problems, and that early validation and traction is a really strong signal that you're solving the right problem, and customer feedback can help perfect a product. But if it's too early, right, it has the opposite effect, right? Which is the blowback from customers, reputation risk, both for the company and for the salespeople and the team that are delivering that. Yeah.
And I think with one of these companies that I was working with, like this specific statement, like really led to what we are like with Ivy League growth was like, I wish I could just put you on pause and bring you back on when things were working. I'm like, and you're a W-2 employee. Like you can't, like there wasn't a way to do that. And so that's where my husband and I were like, well, what if you could? Like, what if we were fractional?
Yeah.
And what if we can come in and you could get like a little bit of our time? Like right now, you're not fully prepared to go out and do the sales piece, but you do need help from sales and you do need help with marketing and you need help with building that out and figuring out pricing and figuring out all those different things, but not, you don't like, you probably can't afford or you're not in a good position to like drop like a ton of money down for a full-time person. And you're not ready for that full-time person. And that's what really kind of pushed us in the direction of like doing the more fractional, was because I'm like, people need this. Like startups need the expertise, but they need it on a budget and they don't need a full-time person.
That's right.
So,
I mean, yeah, you're preaching the choir. I totally
I was
agree.
like, you get it, right?
And the reality is the flexibility that affords actually de-risks the journey for the entrepreneur, because they can get access to talent and experience that they wouldn't get access to otherwise, because they can't afford to hire a full-time head of sales or VP of sales that has done this 3 or 4 or 5 times, or a CMO that has done this, 3 or 4 times. And so they get access to a caliber of talent they wouldn't have otherwise, but also the flexibility of like, let's go out and sell a little bit. Let's build the go-to-market strategy. And if it doesn't work, I don't have to fire someone, right? I can throttle down, I can turn it off, I can go back to the workshop, figure out my product, and then I can go back to market. And so I think that flexibility is really important. Fixed costs early in the startup journey, I have seen create some bad decision making, because when you have high fixed costs, then you're like, well, I have to sell my way through it. And if you're not ready to deliver the product, then you have a bad customer experience, and that hurts retention and reputation. And it really is dangerous if you hire too early or hire senior people too early.
Yeah.
So it's a great insight. You also have your own startup journey, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about ShareHouse and what was the vision there, and what did you learn from that experience?
Yeah. So like how far, like what are we, a year and a half? So I came on full time to ShareHouse. Was it 2023? Yeah, so last year. And I was in a position where they were looking for like another co-founder to build it. So the initial vision of it was they were actually like really close to signing the paperwork on a big space for a co-working 3PL, essentially, for e-commerce brands. But that kind of shifted gears in the earlier days of ShareHouse, and then they went more to like the community. So they were doing a lot of like monthly community events. They did a big conference, like an Amazon conference, before I got there. And that was truly like what they had done a really good job. They had like a good established Slack channel, and they had like a really good following that way. But when I came on, we kind of sat down and we just like went over like, okay, what are we doing? What are we spending our time doing? We need to make money. Like we gotta get a return here. And initially I was like, well, I think we need to shift gears. So it's like they were doing like 2 to 3 free events like a month. I'm like, that's a lot of work, and a
lot of cost.
It's a lot of cost, and you're chasing down like smaller sponsors, which
because your jam is events and partnerships, right?
It's funny that you say that. It's like, I guess it is now, but I actually have a lot of experience more in like building partnerships, but I think I've just kind of fallen into that because I've worked with a lot of startups who are like, well, what are we going to do now? Like, we can do an event or we can do whatever. We have zero marketing budget. What are you going to do? But we kind of shifted gears and tried to focus on the e-commerce founders and like the e-commerce decision makers, and trying to create resources and events and different things like that to help benefit them and help them in their journey. So it started off as like it was a joke initially. The idea for Madeline, who was my co-founder, came up with the name Only Brands. She was like texting me. She's like, what if we called it Only Brands? I'm like, yes, that's it. That's the name. And it was initially just like a joke, like a text back and forth. But then it became something much bigger and just like kind of like a humorous part of like what we were building. And that was like more on the side of like the community, right? Like Only Brands was what we built out on the event side, and what turned into taking like a group of founders to Disneyland and the UFC fights. And
I
like
heard that was a fantastic trip.
I've
heard that from some clients.
It was so crazy. It was so fun. That was my favorite. I've done Disney. I grew up in California, so like I've done Disney a lot. But going with a group of
a lot of Minnie Mouse ears at the house.
Yeah, and just people were just so open, and like there's points where people were crying and like opening up, and just having that experience with other people that are like on the same journey as you it was really cool.
That's cool.
And I have just lasting relationships from that. So that was a really fun thing we got to do. But outside of that, we wanted to build more of a platform, and that's where we were able to pull it off in like a week. It was crazy how quickly we built it out. But I knew from my experience of like, you don't want to dump a ton of money into dev until you have it figured out. So we were able to kind of use existing tools and things to like build it out initially, which was a platform where you could book a time with an e-commerce expert. And it worked. Like we built it out on WordPress and it worked. You could go in, you could book a time, the payments worked. That was all great.
It was all off the shelf. You did
all off the shelf.
No proprietary dev.
No, there wasn't any.
Yeah. This is another great learning. It's like, just there's so much software available to us today that I think entrepreneurs feel like if I don't build it on my own and every line of code is new, then I'm not creating something of value. And I think that's a fallacy.
Yeah.
You should build the things that aren't in the market, build the integrations or the functionality that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But why build another CRM? Why build another scheduling tool? There's, we've got proven tools that have been in market for a long time.
Yeah. I got to know Calendly really well.
Exactly. Like, why build Calendly?
I was like, you literally can build an entire company off of Calendly. Like, and we did. WordPress and Calendly. You can do that. And yeah, that's what I learned from my learning experiences from those early stage startups was like, we could figure this out. Like, and then we can do a proprietary one once we have the funding and once
you've proven that
people care. Like, but we built it. It worked. Pulled it off. And then it was like the recruiting piece. So it was on top of that, we wanted to build a marketplace where people could go and win these mentors like that were on the platform referred other services to people, like they could get a residual
like
or
affiliate model.
So I was also having calls with like hundreds of different partners trying to line that up and then trying to get this piece done. So like it was all coming together. I feel like it needed, obviously, like with platforms like Intro and things like that, like a ton of marketing dollars are getting dumped into those to acquire new customers, which was where we were bootstrapping. So that was a little tricky. So everything was very marketed in a way with like very limited budget on that piece.
So like no capital or very little capital to
yeah. So it was definitely getting bootstrapped with that piece because we were trying to be smart in the way like not dumping more money into something if we could kind of like figure out how to just like gauge the interest, potentially raise later, and then.
But people were interested. Like you started building this, and marketplace is kind of a marketplace.
They're
and
hard.
Marketplaces are the toughest.
They're the hardest, yeah.
Right. And where did you find more difficulty? Was it getting the experts? Was it getting the brands? Like which side of the marketplace was the most difficult to acquire users?
I think we had like a pretty good base of like experts on the platform, and those weren't as hard to get on. It was just the marketing. It's like getting to the market with what you have. That's the hardest part, I feel like. Because people got it though. Like it clicked. Like it made sense to a lot of people who are like, oh yeah, like this is needed. But getting that message to everyone that's where there's typically like bigger costs, or you just have to be grinded out. I think a lot of it was, in my mind, I was like, we just need to do a lot of like personalized outreach to people like, hey, this is a new platform you can use. I found a lot of success in doing like the dirty work that people don't want to do, but it's effective. Like especially with events.
Yeah.
One-to-one.
Interesting. So what is that? Yeah, expand on that. That's interesting. Like, what is the dirty work?
The dirty work is the laborious work that, like, people want to do like one video, put it out there, and then it gets to everyone, and everyone buys what you're selling, which that works really well. But I think what I've found, like over my years of like doing events and helping with events, it's like personalized messages. Especially when you're newer and people don't know who you are and they need to know why they would be buying into what you're doing. Like it takes a text, takes an email, it takes a lot of those different things. And I felt like that's kind of where we were at, where it's like, okay, we're just going to have to do the outbound.
Yeah,
right?
It's so interesting because like we're throwing this event in 2 weeks and I'm just sitting and scrolling through all my contacts and making text invites. And so I'm like telling all my partners, I'm like, listen,
it works.
This is not about like a LinkedIn post. This is about like, just go invite 50, 75, 100 people. And a personal invite goes a long way. It's that one-to-one, that is really powerful because we're all just overloaded with so many marketing messages.
I get so many emails every day. I don't check all my emails.
No.
And then I'm not bought in. Like I'm not bought into your newsletter. I'm sorry. I get so many newsletters. But you have people like, and a lot of times they're like, well, why should I go? And then they're not going to be able to ask that question to your newsletter.
Right.
Like you'd have to answer that in a one-to-one message.
100%.
But that's, I think, more and more like marketing people, because we get so bombarded with like ads and all these different emails and different things. Like I don't feel a connection to that. I think more and more people are going to look for a one-to-one connection.
I totally agree. One-to-one is powerful, right? In an environment where everything is one-to-many. So tell me a little bit about like how you were feeling at this moment. Like you're seeing early traction with ShareHouse.
Yeah.
You're spending 12 hours a day.
Yeah.
15 hours. I mean, it takes a lot of time to build a business. And then what happened?
Without getting into too many details, there's just some differences in the partnership that kind of led to us deciding we needed to shut the doors. Like we did have an opportunity to, like, they were generous and like, hey, you can take it over and keep running with it. But I was kind of contemplating, like, I think a lot of times, like, so much of our identity is in what we're building at work, but then we lose sight of what's happening at home. And in reality, that whole year, I was like going through the motions of my life, that the things that like really mattered, which were like, I had my 4 kids. I have 4 kids. So
I have 6. So
you get it. Yeah, it's a lot. So, and at the time in order to like pull off a full day's work, I was getting 4 kids out the door at like 7:45 every day. And then I wouldn't see them till like 5:30 that night. Like I would like do the loop, pick them up on the way home.
Then you're back on your computer at night after the kids go down.
Yeah, because you're always doing something.
Yeah.
Like, so you're never fully like disconnected. And even though I had that opportunity to, I'm like, I could take this, I could like keep going with it. But then I don't know, my kids are young and I just was like, I feel like I've forgotten, like the biggest failure in my life would be like failing my kids. Right. Like, so it just didn't seem to matter. Like as hard as that was to shut the doors, and like we decided just to like kind of let that happen, I felt even more like questions in my life. I'm like, am I really focused on what matters? How can I create more balance in my life and not get fully sucked into things that are like consuming my whole life? And that's kind of what happened, right? I did that. I allowed myself to get, and it's hard for me to like set boundaries with myself when I get really excited about things I'm working on and I get really involved. I have a really hard time like setting boundaries. And in my mind, I'm like, oh, I'm doing all this good stuff. But then I'm like, but am I? Like, well, who's not getting my time? Like, who's not getting my attention? I think that's where I I decided for myself is like, I know if I continue down this path with this project, it's going to take a lot of my time. And my kids are so young right now. I don't feel like that's what I want to do with my life right now.
It's a really tough decision to make, but maybe not so tough when you really put it in perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the fear you had of failure was probably, you had a greater fear that you would fail in the thing that mattered the very most, which is your role as a parent, as a mother, versus failing at a startup.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it kind of goes back to even, so my dad was an entrepreneur. And I feel like a lot of that like entrepreneur spirit is like in me, but he passed away when I was 20. And it was after I hadn't seen him for like a whole month. He was working 20-hour days. He was doing a big project up in Washington for Costco, like sealing the flooring. And I hadn't seen him for like, and when I did see him after his like 20-hour work days and getting like 3 hours of sleep in the car, he just looked like dead inside. I don't know how to explain it. Like he very much was like driven, wanting to be an entrepreneur, wanting to do all the things to help support his family. And then, the next second he's gone. He died in an accident on his way to that project he was working on. Sorry. And I think we just need those reminders. And I think he is constantly reminding me of what's important. Because I think if he could go back in time, that's not where he would want to put his time, right? Even though, like, he would want to have more time with his family, right?
100%.
So that was the reminder, because you get so focused and you get so sucked into whatever you're doing. And at the end of the day, it's like true failure is failing your family, right? Like you don't, like the whole purpose of working and building is so we can grow as a person, but it's so we can support our family. That's the whole reason. It's like, that's why we go to work every day. So I'm grateful that I do still have, like, I feel like there is a purpose to my drive of being an entrepreneur and wanting to do the things I do. But I think you just have to check yourself sometimes.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being so vulnerable and open about something that's so personal. And I find myself sitting here as a father, right? And asking myself the question, is the cost worth the reward? Mm-hmm. And maybe I'll just like look at the audience and the listeners and just say, maybe this is your time to reflect on whether or not your journey in entrepreneurship is worth it, because there's a lot of ways you can make money and fulfill your ambitions and provide for a family. And entrepreneurship takes a level of sacrifice, time, emotional energy, focus that is unusual. It's not a 9-to-5. And so I love that you kind of surface this whole idea of failure in your family is the worst kind of failure. Failure in business is not.
It's truly not. Yeah. Like after we shut the doors of Share House, I'll be honest, I was like, I disconnected from social media. I was like, I disappeared for like 3 months because I had to still process it, because it's a loss. Like when you build something and then you don't have it anymore, there's a loss there.
Sure.
Like, so I felt that loss.
So why did you disconnect from social media? Talk to me about, like, was it shame? Was it embarrassment? Was it just you were overwhelmed?
I just didn't. I think it was just a little bit of both, probably. I think there's my identity. It's no longer there, So you're just like, well, who am I? I think it was finding myself again.
Yeah.
Because I gave myself to this. And now I had to take a step back and be like, nope, that's not who I am.
Yeah.
That is not who I am. Like, who am I? I think that's a hard question. Like, and that's something we can all ask ourselves is like, who are you outside of your business?
That's right.
Like, if you can't answer that question, I would invite you to take a step back and like really dig deep and figure out who you are, because that could be gone in a second.
What's up, Phil fans? You know, as we've listened to so many guests on this podcast, that the road to success is often paved with failure, with a lot of challenges and even full-on face plants. But there's a thing that you could do to help skip some of those bumps and bruises. And that's really where the consultants at Amplio come in. See, Amplio offers fractional executives in finance, marketing, and HR. And these are people who've experienced a lot. They've been in the trenches. They've built businesses. They've failed. But here's the kicker. They've learned from those failures, and now they're applying all that wisdom to your business to support you so you don't have to learn the hard way. I mean, think about it. Instead of stumbling around in the dark and hoping you don't hit the wall, you could bring someone in who's already mapped out that room, right? Amplio consultants and experts have worked with and for numerous companies of all sizes, and they've gathered insights on what works, where to focus, and how to actually grow your business efficiently. So while we embrace failure on this podcast, there is no rule that says you have to fail at everything yourself. So check out Amplio and see how their fractional executives can help your business move forward and avoid those painful learning curves. Sometimes the smartest move is learning from someone else's failure. Visit amplio.com to learn more. Businesses will come and go.
Yep.
And we've talked about this with other entrepreneurs. When our identity and our feelings of worth and value are inseparably tied and connected with our title and our role as a founder, a CEO, or a CMO, or whatever our role is in our company, we set ourselves up for a lot more pain than is necessary. Because the second we're not a CEO or a founder or a successful entrepreneur or at a Fast 50 event, or like, then we feel like we're not worth anything, or our value to society, to our community, to our friends has somehow been diminished.
Yeah.
So it's easy to say that. It's hard to do it. So how have you decoupled your role as an entrepreneur with your sense of self-worth?
I think it's actually helped that I've kind of done less, if that makes sense. Like, I'm not at every event. I'm very selective in where I spend my time, because I feel like I don't have to show face anymore. Like, it's just like being more thoughtful, because I know that time spent there is time spent away from my family. So I have like taken a huge step back. I used to be at like every networking event. I used to be at a lot more things, but I think I'm just a lot more thoughtful in where I spend my time.
I think there's this FOMO as an entrepreneur and a founder, where you're like, I mean, I had an event last night I should have been at, and I was feeling guilt around that as, 7 o'clock. And I was like, I should really be there. It's down in Utah County. There's amazing people there, amazing speakers. And I wasn't there. And I can't tell you how many times I'm like, I'm not doing my job. I'm not representing the brand. I'm not building if I'm not present. But guess what? I'm not representing my real job. I'm not impacting the people that matter most when I'm not present with my children. And so it's, we have to pick our places.
Yeah.
And there's ebbs and flows in the entrepreneurial journey. But I love that we have to be really obsessive as entrepreneurs around where we spend our time. Otherwise, every hour of every day will get filled with things that seem important in the moment, which may or may not be highest impact, bring us the most joy, and help us succeed in life outside of work.
Yeah.
So it's really, unfortunately, you and I are probably having to learn this the hard way.
Yeah.
Right? I'm like,
but at least we learn. That's the whole point of life, right? Is to learn. Like, if you're taking a step back and you're allowing yourself to like learn from these things, like I think that's the whole point of existing, right?
What's your key learning from the share house experience? What's the piece that you're like, I won't make that mistake again?
Honestly, it's the time. I think where I'm at in my life now with my kids, the age they are, I don't want to put myself in a position where I spend that much time away from them. I know that's probably not like the business answer you're looking for. but for me, it's like, and then, yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing. What I needed to learn from that is the priority I needed to put in place. And like, I can still be an entrepreneur. I can still build, but I can maybe be a little more thoughtful in what I'm building and how I'm building it and where I'm spending my time.
Any learning around partnerships? Partnerships are hard. I see so many co-founders go into business together, and it's exciting on day one, and sometimes misalignment or personality conflicts can be the thing that craters the business.
I wouldn't say this like share house would like there was the personality, different things that played out there, but like overall, like I had a really good experience from that, and I'm grateful for what I learned, and I'm grateful for the opportunity that I got to, like, I feel like I got an MBA in building that. Like there's so much I learned and so many incredible relationships I made from being there. And I think I was meant to do that. Like I was meant to spend that time doing that. I'm grateful for that. But I would say like in other ventures I've done in the past is to always get things in writing. Because I've had businesses taken from under me through an email because somebody owned the domain that I didn't have access to. And I didn't have anything in writing to protect me from that. So
yeah, it's a great finding. We need to have trusting relationships with our partners, but it's also helpful to get things in writing, because I've seen too many times where there's a handshake agreement, and then when things get hard or things are going great, those handshake agreements get rewritten in ways that can be really damaging to the business and to the entrepreneurs.
I think I heard a saying, it's like you keep honest people honest when you get it in writing. Because I at the end of the day, like things will happen and you don't know what's happening behind the scenes with your partner, like what like they're dealing with at home, if they're having like financial strain, what's leading them to act the way they're acting. But you're keeping them honest if you have it in writing.
I like that. Keeping honest people honest.
Yeah.
I remember when we connected, I was fascinated by this event because I was just in the process of launching the podcast.
Yeah.
So tell me about Failed Fest. What is what was the inspiration for this? Maybe what you've talked about today.
Yeah.
But what was the inspiration? What's the format? Like, tell me more about Failed Fest.
Yeah. So it was like 2 years ago. I was at lunch with my husband and we had like a few other people there. My friend Sarah was there as well. And we were just kind of joking around, like their typical conferences in Utah. It's always like people getting interviewed, these super successful founders, and you're just hearing like all the things they did right and like all the things they did well. And then we just were joking around. I'm like, what if we had Fail Fest? And it was like everyone's failures. And instead of like, we have like a couch and a therapist, and they're like interviewing the founder of like all the things you haven't heard about, like behind the scenes, like all the failures that happened that led to their successes. And then we were just kind of spiraling, and we can have the graveyard of failed products and like all these different fun things. And I kind of sat on that for a while. And I think after my experience with Sharehouse, where I was like, I felt it a little deeper. I'm like, I think a lot of people need to hear from people they look up to, like what's really happening behind the scenes.
That's right.
That led them to where they are today. So it's been like a work in progress. We were shooting for October, but I was pulled into a really big event that took a lot of my time.
Which was phenomenal.
Yeah. So I'm looking at a few new dates for that. So, and we have some things leading up to. I want to build more of a community around it and have once a month panels, not just one big thing. So I'm trying to break that down and kind of, because I want people to have access to it more often than like once a year, like one big conference where we could have these conversations more openly. So
I think they're so valuable. That's why I launched the podcast. And that's why I'm so grateful you came on to share that, because we need to hear kind of the unvarnished versions of these entrepreneurial stories, not just to like help entrepreneurs who are navigating the complex emotional and financial implications of a failed business, but also to help entrepreneurs that are thinking, hey, I want to start my own company, and I'm reading Entrepreneur Magazine and Fast Company and, LinkedIn. I'm watching LinkedIn, and all these entrepreneurs are making it. And the reality is, it's like, no, most of the entrepreneurs are not making it, even when it seems like they're doing well. The cost of that and the eventual outcomes in most cases are closing the doors, the experience you had and that I've had. And unless we talk about that and destigmatize failure, then I feel like we're just going to be glorifying the IPOs and, all the success stories. And really, that's not the most probable outcome.
Yeah. And I wonder if there's more people being open about, even like those 3 startups I worked with, like, don't do this. Like, this will make you fail. Like, how many companies will be more successful if we're more open about, like, things to avoid?
That's
like,
right.
Don't do this.
At episode 100 of the F Word, if we get there, I want to just take all of the patterns and all of the learnings and the stories and just like distill it down into like a guide. Like, here are the 100 things that you should never do. And maybe it's 10 things, but like, here are the things you should be aware of. Here are the pitfalls, right? Here are the things that entrepreneurs over and over and over again have had to learn the hard way, and you don't have to learn the hard way. It's also the reason why your engagement with a company is so beneficial as a consultant, is you can help say, whoa, I've seen this before. You don't want to do this.
You don't want to do this.
Like, let's not go sell that product 10,000 times when like it doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
It's vaporware.
Yep.
So Lindsey, this has been so insightful. What would you share with an entrepreneur, both your perspective as a consultant, having worked with lots of companies that are growing and scaling, as a co-founder of a company that had to shut its doors, and as a mother, what would you share with an entrepreneur?
I would share that it's so important to not try to do everything yourself. Like, to lean on friends and mentors and people to help you through those hard times. And sometimes that means like taking a step back. I think it's so hard. You get sucked into what you're building and doing, and it might be just destroying your life, right? And maybe it's okay to fail. And I think that's a hard thing to hear, is like, nobody wants to fail. Nobody wants to feel like a failure. But even through shutting the doors of the companies I've had to work with, and I've seen the doors shut of, I've learned so much, and I am the person who I am today. And like, I have the experience in my career that I have because I took a chance and I learned from that. But I'm not a failure because things didn't work out. Maybe that's the biggest thing. It's like, you're not a failure. And just, even if you're in a dark place and you feel like giving up, and you feel like you've just failed at everything, just think of all the things you've gained and learned from those experiences that have created growth in you, and the person you are today.
Well, I love that you have failed, but you are not a failure.
Yeah, it's okay I have failed. I have failed so many times, but thinking through all those times, I've grown so much as a person, and I've learned so much from those experiences. So
I love that. I also love the insight that entrepreneurs think they have to do it on their own. And I once sat in a meeting with a founder of a company, and I said, he was the CEO, and I had just come off a stint as a CEO that was really tough. And I looked at him, I said, it's really lonely to be the CEO. And he said, no, it's not. And I was like, I had just met him, and I was like, whoa. And he said, it's not lonely. It's not lonely if you surround yourself by people that you trust and you share that load. The success and failure of this business will not rest on me alone. And that was such a profound moment in my career. And I've never said that the job of a CEO is lonely. There were moments many years into that journey that we talked about that conversation. I think there was moments he did feel the loneliness, and I reminded him, it's not lonely if you lean on us, your management team, and you lean on mentors and your family. So that's amazing.
I'm Lindsey Ivie. I failed, but I am not a failure.
Thanks for tuning in to The Real F Word. The real F word is failure. And remember that failure is a stepping stone. It's not just a stumbling block. Join us next time as we continue to explore the journey of resilience and growth without ignoring the true cost, personally, professionally, and financially, that comes with failure. Keep learning, keep growing, and keep embracing the real stories of entrepreneurship. See you next time.